the day of.
No, just explain it to us the first time as we're taking the text.
Maybe. Hi guys. Ian, Corey. No Christian, no Brendan. I need Brendan to come here and get his orders. Who else do I have? Oh, Sterling is my other person. No Hayward yet. Troy is here. Eli is here. Nate's here. Chip, Sterling, Andreas. It's always those three. It's always Christian, Brendan, Hayward that are either late or absent. But maybe once I put in, as soon as I clicked it, Brendan showed up. Okay. Let me fix this. It's the way it always goes. Brendan and Sterling, I have orders for both of y'all, your graduation announcements. Sterling, I think your mom said that she'd come by tomorrow and pick it up, or one of y'all would pick it up. Brendan, you should just come to school so that you can get your.
All right.
I'll be there tomorrow, so I can come and get it.
Okay. Sounds good. I think y'all are my only two left. Who's capping gowns do I still have?
I grabbed mine a long time ago.
Corey, Troy, and Chip. Those are the three I have left.
We're gonna be able to decorate our cats. Is that something we do in school or out of school?
Out of school. Not everybody would probably even want to decorate their caps, but it's an option. Okay, so first thing I was going to mention is that several of you have not yet turned in a vocab quiz, which is surprising because we had the whole time the other day to do it. I know he makes such a grand entrance every day. You should see him in the morning. He comes in the cafeteria and every day he's like, "Hey, Miss McClellan, what's up? Did you have a good weekend?" I'm like, "Troy, please, it's morning time." Yes, he does. It's a little overwhelming first thing in the morning. I don't know why he continues to do it, but it's what he's done all year. I know. You'd think from this that he is just totally low key in the mornings, but y'all don't see him first thing. It's wild. So some of you did not yet turn in a vocab quiz. You can do that on your own time. Or yes, from Friday, yeah. Oh, I'm missing the vocab quiz from last week from some of you guys. Obviously, like Wednesday, I will, if you don't have it in by Wednesday, I'll hold you during the success session. No, I mean, I'm sure there are some people who didn't turn in a vocab quiz from 7 weeks ago, but I'm no longer concerned about that. Your essay is due on Wednesday. So I've actually changed my plans a little bit in order to give you more time to work on it in class today and possibly tomorrow, depending on how fast we move through things. But Wednesday, obviously, with Wednesdays being success session, I would just hold you all, or not even hold you probably. I would just say work on and submit your essay, unless I don't have a vocab quiz from everyone, in which case I'll keep those people, if that makes sense. But what we're going to do today, we're going to go over some notes for the last section of British literature, which is 20th century / contemporary. And we're not going to do a whole lot of stuff with contemporary just because we don't have time. I did have us set to do 2 short stories, but instead we're just going to do 1, and we'll do that tomorrow. And then we'll do some poetry after. We'll probably do that on Friday. Thursday should be fun though. So let me just get myself plugged in here. Why has my Zoom done that? That's so weird. Why did it get all skinny?
Summer vibe.
That's so weird. I have to plug in my laptop for too long. And okay, let me share my screen with you folks, and we're gonna go through these notes, and then I will give you the time to work on your essay. So this is 20th century British literature, which is our last era. On Thursday, we'll look at a presentation with a particular type of writing, which is also mentioned in this presentation, but we're just going to do a little bit more in-depth stuff with that a little bit later. But it's part of 20th century British literature. So we also call it modernism, and modernism applies to both British and American literature. But basically, we're looking at the time period right in and after World War I. And things really changed for a lot of people, as they tend to do after a war. So one of the things was that there's this trend of thought that affirms the power of human beings to create, improve, and reshape their environment. Basically, you can be anybody you want to be, you can do anything you want to do. There's a lot more science happening now. So with the aid of scientific knowledge, technology, and practical experimentation, there's a lot more of that. It's very progressive. Sometimes it's optimistic. More optimistic probably in England than in America. American modernism is very depressing for the most part. Political, cultural, and artistic movements that were rooted in the changes in Western society. And we're looking at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century here. So with modernism, it's a series of reforming cultural movements in art and architecture, music, literature, and the applied arts that emerged in the 3 decades before 1914. And the reason we're saying 1914 as like a marker is because that's the start of World War I. It encouraged the re-examination of every aspect of existence. You're just like really reflecting on what life is all about in pretty much every avenue. And your goal is to find what it is that's holding back progress and replacing that with new, progressive, and better ways of reaching the same end. What's holding us back as a society, and how do we change that?
So, are we gonna read something?
We're going to read one story. Yeah, one story and some poetry. Yeah, we were going to read 2 stories, but in order to give you guys more time to work on your essays, I just decided against it. There are new realities of the industrial and mechanized age, which were permanent and imminent. One of the big ones, and it probably mentions this later on, but cars are a huge thing now. And because of that, you don't think about how like transportation can change literature, but it really does. It's like, if you think about, Frankenstein, for instance, to get anywhere, they'd have to be traveling for like weeks. Because they took horses or ships or whatever. And those things are all very slow modes of transportation. But with the invention of the automobile, you can get somewhere in a day. You can take a day trip, and you can write about these. Yeah. I'm doing The Great Gatsby right now with my American literature class. And one of the cool things about it is, whereas like always before, you've been kind of like stuck in one setting, they'll like motor off to New York for an afternoon and come back. And so you're able to like see the way that different parts of the world work and different parts of the country. It's really cool. So the worldview around this time is that new stuff is good and true and beautiful. We love new stuff. Like every era of literature does, it rebels against the period that comes before it. That's always what happens. So like all these academic and historicist traditions, we're going against that. I don't know. And it's so weird because like we're actually doing stuff, but we're like, it's so hard to know what's happening when you're in it. And then like when you look back on it, you're like, oh, that was a time of, social unrest or whatever. I mean, it is a time of social unrest right now. and a very cool thing is that traditional forms of art and architecture and literature, faith, social organization, everything is outdated. So people are trying to be a lot more non-traditional. We'll definitely look at some sort of non-traditional stuff later on this week. A lot of famous thinkers influenced this time. Charles Darwin with the, evolution, survival of the fittest. He influenced biology and honestly, like a lot of stuff, religion, psychology. Karl Marx is influencing political science. Y'all might remember him because I'm pretty sure you read Animal Farm at some point. Sigmund Freud with psychology, which like he's outdated now, but back at the time, everyone was like, oh God, he's amazing and he's seeing all these things. Freud is the guy who says that every man's innermost like untapped desire is to sleep with his mother. That's obviously insane. But it's a whole thing about like competition for your mother's affection with your father, and like your deepest innermost desires to kill your father and marry your mother. Kind of outdated at this point. We don't really go with that anymore. Yeah. And Darwin, obviously, like I was saying, theory of evolution by natural selection, which means survival of the fittest. The weaker species get taken out over time. And human beings are also, okay. Human beings are being driven by the same impulses as lower animals. Like we're all animals and our impulses are the same. It's just maybe our intellect that makes us a little bit different. But because of this, it undermines a lot of the religious certainty of the general public, a sense of human uniqueness of how intelligent we are, and an ennobling spirituality. So even now, Charles Darwin is sort of controversial.
I think all three of those guys are.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's like Darwin's approach to evolution is kind of not the generally accepted.
Yeah.
You know, he kind of looked at it as a split strip line.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that just comes with time and like more technology, more research. But at the time, these were like the huge influential people. It's kind of funny, like looking back on it now, that these people that we would consider their ideas to be sort of outdated, were like the top influencers. Karl Marx, like I mentioned, y'all might remember him if you did Animal Farm with Mr. Johnson or Mr. Casey. Yes, maybe. He thought that the problems of the economic order were kind of ingrained. Like there are systemic issues with capitalism, and a lot of people obviously agree with that. And Sigmund Freud, I just kind of talked about with the Oedipal complex thing, but he did get, like, even though that kind of stuff is really outdated now, the Oedipal complex, which is either one, which it comes from the Greek myth of Oedipus, who got told by like an oracle or something that he was going to kill his father and marry his mother, and he tried so hard to fight against that prophecy, but he wound up doing it anyway. Like he didn't know who his parents actually were, so he killed this random guy that turned out to be his father, and then he fell in love with this woman and she wound up to be his mother, and then he blinded himself because he was like, oh, I can't see the horrors of what I've done. So Sigmund Freud said that we all kind of have that in us, and that part's kind of outdated and maybe not ever true. It makes sense as far as like competing for affection.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like, it makes sense that, you know, a guy is going to be attracted to someone who is characteristics like his mom.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, you know, when like little kids all the time are like, I'm gonna marry mommy, or like little girls are like, I'm gonna marry Daddy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, it's just not as clear cut as he makes it sound. Like we all want to sleep with our parents. We don't. Yes, exactly. Like there's a reason that their thought that their contributions were so important. And Sigmund Freud, for one, did talk about how the human mind was so intricate, and that all reality is subjective. You know, it doesn't really matter what the outside world perceives, it's what you're perceiving inside your brain that is your reality, which is kind of true. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this stuff. Impressionism, that's more important for art, but it was like we don't see objects but see light itself. So if you look at impressionist paintings, it's just kind of like they all look kind of blurry, like it's not very detailed flowers. It'll be like little blobs of color and you're like, oh, that's supposed to be flowers. There's a lot of symbolism that starts showing up in every form of art. We know what symbolism is, so I'm not going over that too much. But some things about modernist literature, obviously it moves away from the bonds of realist literature, again, reacting to what came before it. It introduces concepts like disjointed timelines, which a lot of stuff now has disjointed timelines, like flashbacks, flash forwards, just like a non-linear timeline. This is a fun phrase. It's distinguished by emancipatory meta-narrative. What? What does that mean? Basically, it's a comprehensive explanation of historical experience or knowledge, which says that there's an explanation for everything that happens in a society. Now, do I agree with that? Probably not. I think some stuff is pretty senseless, but another thing is that it ventures into subject matter that's traditionally mundane. And if you look, it says example handouts. We don't have that handout, but that is the poem that we're going to look at on Friday, which for the record is my favorite poem in the world. It's quite long, but easy to read. Not necessarily easy to understand, but easy to read. It's got a marked pessimism, which is a clear rejection of the optimism that we see in Victorian literature. I mean, obviously in Importance of Being Earnest, everybody lives happily ever after. That's not really happening in modernist literature so much. A common motif that we see in modernist fiction is that there's an alienated individual, someone who feels really apart and different from everyone, trying to make sense of this very fragmented society. And again, this is like right after World War I, and wars just like mess with people and they make you kind of take stock of what life is really about. And so we have a lot of that, a lot of characters who are just trying to, like, in the aftermath of war, figure out what their place in the world actually is. There does not tend to be a central heroic figure. Sometimes there's a central figure, but he might not be heroic. And then again, like disjointed fragments, overlapping voices. This is all really like having to deal with experimenting with new forms, because we haven't really seen too much of this before. Some stylistic features. There's a concern for larger factors like social or historical change. We're not necessarily telling one person's story. We might be trying to examine like a big issue in society through one person's story. This is demonstrated in stream of consciousness writing, and that's what we're going to look at on Thursday. Stream of consciousness writing is actually super fun, and I'm going to have y'all practice it. A lot of students really like doing that. And I'm not, sometimes I say, oh, this is going to be fun, and it's just like, it's fun to me and not anybody else. But people do actually really tend to like the stream of consciousness practice. And also you see a reaction to the emergence of city life as a central force in society, which we started to kind of see a bit with Victorian stuff, since they're so focused on like those very like town versus country. Tends to have an open form, meaning we're not sticking to like a rhyme scheme in poetry, or even necessarily like certain stanzas. We're just kind of doing whatever we want. A discontinuous narrative, again, like lapses in time, flashbacks, stuff like that. Juxtaposition, such a fun word, which is when two unlike things are put next to one another It has this quality of being unexpected. And the point of that is to compare and contrast the two to either show similarities or differences. That can be any kind of thing. Like you could contrast settings, you could contrast characters, ideas. The one that is a good example, and again, I don't want to pull everything from American Lit, but in The Great Gatsby, Gatsby lives in this huge lavish mansion and our narrator lives in this tiny shack right beside it. And just like seeing the difference in those two says a lot about their characters and their stations in life and stuff. There's also a lot of classical allusions, which is when you make a reference to a place or event or a literary work, a myth, a work of art, something that everybody knows about. And sometimes that's done directly, sometimes it's done by implication. Modernist literature borrows a lot from other cultures and languages. It has unconventional use of metaphor. We already talked about fragmentation, and sometimes there are multiple narrative points of view, which can be called parallax. I'm not going to ask you about that on any kind of quiz or test. Free verse, and again, when we talked about open form, free verse specifically is a style of poetry that's not using a strict meter or rhyme. Like you can still tell that it's poetry. It's probably got stanzas, or like it's not going to be in paragraph form, but it's going to be a lot more open. It's not going to follow as many rules. One of my favorite words, I love this word, intertextuality. What this is when shapes, I was just looking at the word shaping. Works of literature are kind of in conversation with each other. It shapes text meaning by other texts, or it references one text while you're reading another. A good example of this, there's this horror book called House of Leaves that I had to read in grad school. And it's got a whole thing about intertextuality and like different forms of media. And like in the book, they're like, they find a bunch of letters and they're making a documentary. So like you kind of have different forms of media going on inside the book. But then apart from that, one of the characters in the book, his mother was in a mental institution at some point. And there's a separate book that's all letters from her while she was in the mental institution. And then separate from that still, the author's sister is a musician and she released an album of songs about the book. So that's very cool. Then that's like a pretty extreme example of that, but like all these different types of media that are interacting with each other. Very cool. A meta-narrative, which basically means a story about a story. This is employed sometimes where there's like this grand narrative. The prefix meta means beyond, by the way, and a narrative is a story. So we're looking at beyond the story. We deal with a breakdown of social norms and cultural sureties, things that we're confident about, we're no longer confident about. There's a dislocation of meaning and sense from its normal context. Valorization means like making someone into a hero or like kind of idolizing them or romanticizing them. And we kind of romanticize a despairing individual in the face of an unmanageable future, because that's what a lot of people were feeling at the time. Like we just don't know how to deal with life. We don't know what's coming down the bend. And they're just like despairing about it, but that's relatable. I kind of talked about that a little bit. It's a product of the metropolis of cities and urban scapes. We don't have to just stay with one place anymore. And part of that is due to the overwhelming technological changes of the 20th century, like the automobile. There's a sense of disillusionment. I don't know why this is in two separate. I'm actually going to see if I can fix this right now because that's going to bother me. Disillusionment is the feeling when you realize that something is not what you thought it was. And a lot of people are kind of just disillusioned with life at this point. Like my life is not turning out the way I thought it was going to, and I'm going to be upset about it. It's more than just disappointment. It's like traumatic. And that especially happens when a belief that's central to your identity is shown to be false. Stream of consciousness, I'm not going to go through right now because I'm going to go through it in a lot of detail on Thursday, but it is a common type of writing that happens then. But that is the last thing. On Canvas, this is, I already have the rest of the week here, but you'll only see this much. So this is the notes that we just went through. That's kind of what we're doing for the rest of the week. But I want to make sure to give you guys time to work on your essays, and we might have some time tomorrow. We're going to read a story tomorrow, and you'll have an assignment to go with that, but it's like 3 questions, and that won't be due until Thursday. So you should still have a bit of time to work on your essay.
We will not have time to work on it.
Tomorrow? Well, you'll have the rest of today, and then tomorrow we have to read a story, and I'll give you the 3 questions, but those aren't due until Thursday, whereas your essays due Wednesday, and then Wednesday, that's all you have to do. So you do have a good bit of time to work on it. Any questions either about any of that or about the essay?
When are we doing this for the
Thursday.
that we should do for like 5?
Honestly, I think it would be beneficial and also just fun. Okay, well, let me know. Obviously, just email me if you guys have any questions about any of this stuff. Those of you who are virtual, if you want to leave and work independently, you can. If you want to stay in case you have questions, you can do that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off and mute myself so that y'all can work on your essays, but just holler at me if you need me.